Imagine going back to the town in which you grew up. You walk through the center. You find the streets deserted, the shops boarded up, the shop where you used to buy candy or books, even your local post office, now gone, replaced with wooden boards and graffiti. How would you feel? What would you do? What would you want to do? Let me introduce Eric. He was born in Detroit, and he grew up just outside of the city. When he was 19, he moved to Boston. He settled down, he got a job, and then last year, he moved back to his hometown. This is the question and the scenario that he faced. Instead of getting upset about it, he turned that emotion into action, and he did something about it. He didn't do it alone. He had help from an online creative community whose sole purpose is to collaborate and create completely new solutions to social problems that we face. Together with a team of people he'd never met in person, they created a solution to help people like Eric transform the disused spaces around us into something good. This story is about the power of the digital community, people like Eric and the thousands like him who would otherwise never have met, regularly getting together online to improve their local communities and those they've never even been to. It's about the tools they're using and about how you can do that too. Whether these problems are in their own backyards or an ocean away, this group of people are designing some pretty amazing solutions. And I particularly want to talk about how they're doing that. Because what this group of people has learned is how to collaborate and compete in ways that work and that anyone can use. Whether they're designing local community solutions in Detroit or Dublin. I'm a designer. That's my background. And in my career, I've gone from designing really tangible things that I would use myself to hoping that one day I would design things that would live on shelves and that other people would use, to designing on collaborative teams, where it's much harder to say who did what, but the idea is that we're all smarter together. The company where I work, design company, is called IDEO. And it lives and breathes this idea of collaboration. Collaboration is something I've been passionate about throughout my career. I was part of a team of people many years ago that designed this game called Cola Bola. Hands up those of you who've played Pac-Man before. Excellent. So you remember, you've got to control this little yellow guy in the center of the screen. Now what we did is we took his controls and we split them in half. We gave the left and right to one person and the up and down to another. And we said you have to work together to control Pac-Man and escape the ghosts and eat the fruit. But just to make it even harder, we took away the joystick and we replaced it with this giant haptic interface, which is this. Now, as you'll see from the videos, it's a lot of fun. Funnily enough, no one ever completed a single level. The notion of collaboration in this context was so foreign. Their brains and their bodies were sending different messages. Even though they knew they had to work together, they wanted to compete instead. The only ones that ever came close were these twins. They just sat down, played silently, and were in perfect sync. Someone should probably do a study on these twins. Everyone else had to shout at each other, push, wave their arms like crazy. In a situation like this, we expect to compete. Our culture, our work environments are often geared up to make us feel like we have to compete. In many contexts, competition is really useful. It helps us to get the fastest or the best result. An obvious example is sport. In other contexts, like cola bola or families, collaboration makes more sense. Competition just seems wasteful or weird. But sometimes you need both. Historically, we can see these two things working well together wherever we're trying to push forwards the boundaries of human knowledge. For example, in science research. A good example of this is what happened in the 60s, when NASA was trying to be the first to put a man on the moon. They just put engineering teams in these great big hangars. You'd have 5 teams trying to come up with different ways of creating the rocket propulsion or the landing gear for the spacecraft itself. What was interesting about this was it was transparent competition. The progress was viewable in real time. One team might look over to the next one and say, "Hey, what's that funky ceramic stuff you're using on the nose cone there?" And so they'd share ideas, resources, and learnings. So they were competing, but they were also collaborating. Competing and collaborating. And it's been shown that when these two things work well together, you get some amazing results. It was shown that the efficiency of those NASA scientists working in that way saved huge amounts of time and money, even though on first appearance it might have seemed wasteful or redundant to have 5 teams working simultaneously. And of course, it's something that actually helped them to get to be the first to put a man on the moon. It's something that's actually been repeated in modern industry. Major auto manufacturers use this process of simultaneous development but radically transparent competition to drive forward new product ideas for innovation. When it comes to innovation, do you go with competition or collaboration? Well, I think you need a bit of both, but you've got to have the right conditions for these things to be successful together. So where can we learn from? Where does this kind of cooperation work really well? Well, the world of open source software works a little bit like this. Developers have resources like SourceForge, a library of software, problems that have already been solved. Programmers can piggyback on the success of those who've gone before them. However, in the social innovation space, this kind of sharing rarely happens. We just don't have these kinds of tools or these kinds of kernels of wisdom that are being shared across the different silos in this space. This is one of the reasons why we created OpenIDEO. We thought rather than having a bunch of hotshot designers at IDEO work on these problems, why not open up to the world to take part and open source the approach? If one of the premises of how good design gets done is that it's not just about guys with trendy sneakers and designer stubble who've been to art school, but about what David Kelly and Tim Brown have talked about on the TED stage before, design thinking, the idea of how human-centered design gets done, and that mindset being something that really anyone can apply to problem solving. If we believe that's true, we thought, why not create massive teams of people working on these problems? That was the premise that we started with when we created OpenIDEO. We've been going for about 2 years now, and we've been running what we call challenges online. They're a bit like projects. They always have an organization behind them that's serious about creating a dent in some of the big social and environmental issues that we struggle with as a planet. And we've been honored to work with some really amazing people. We've worked with Jamie Oliver to help the next generation of kids eat more healthily. We've also worked on problems such as illegal detention and maternal health. In the time the community's been going, It's now around 30,000 from 170 countries. The community's managed to help a group of students at Stanford increase the US National Bone Marrow Registry. And thanks to some of the concepts and the work of these students, recently, one participant managed to find a life-saving bone marrow match to help his struggle against leukemia. They've also managed to help a team in Colombia design and prototype an ultrasound service for expectant mums in a part of the world where otherwise this technology will be inaccessible due to cost but also cultural barriers. The community recently finished a challenge that was focused on the problem of communities that are depopulating, a problem I know that Michigan is well versed in. Despite the fact that most of the world now live in cities, many industrial and post-industrial cities are actually depopulating. Detroit has gone from its peak from 3 million to 300,000. So this challenge looked to boost and build off some of the fantastic efforts that are happening already in this space. And there are some amazing things happening, some of which have been shared on this stage before, CEOs for Cities just last year. We worked with the company Steelcase to ask the question, how can we revitalize struggling communities that are facing economic decline? And I'd like to use this example to talk about how OpenIDEO works, how thousands of people are regularly getting together to collaborate on an international scale to address these problems. The community starts by sharing stories, examples of revitalization efforts that are happening throughout the world. Community member Mina shared this example from Australia, permablitz communities. These are groups of people who get together in their disused backyards to transform them into growing spaces and teach each other the lessons and the tools they need to grow their own food again. From its humble origins, permablitz communities have now grown to 300 worldwide. This is just one of the literally hundreds of examples that were shared in this challenge, from small-scale efforts to much larger-scale projects. By asking the community to share these stories, it's a way to help them empathize with the community or context that we're designing for, in this case, places like Detroit. The challenge process is like a timeline, and people are adding all these stories. The community is a bit like an ant colony. It's kind of learning as it goes. It's amassing all this collective intelligence so that it can get as inspired as possible and come up with some new ideas to address the challenge that we're looking at. And in this challenge, they came up with some really amazing ideas. About 330 to help address the issue of revitalization in communities. I'm going to share with you just two of the winning concepts that came out of this challenge that are in the process of becoming new ventures to improve parts of the US and other parts of the world. The first one's called Decode the Codes. Imagine you see a vacant lot near where you live and think, why isn't that being used? I could turn that into a kid's playground or a farmer's market. But how do you get started? What Decode the Codes does is provide you with a community of like-minded people who've already been successful in transforming where they live, and with the tactical steps to help you get started with your project, such as legal procedures. Mike, who's the author of this concept, is currently building the website as we speak, and he's already signed up some successful entrepreneurs in Phoenix who will be sharing their stories of their success to help other people do the same thing. The second idea is called City API. Using your cell phone, you can tag spaces that you think need work. This registers the location on a website, and the next thing that happens is a sign is erected in that space. This gives local people the chance to input, add their ideas, and discuss online how that project should evolve. They can even volunteer time and materials and make decisions so that the project actually becomes real. This is a prototype of the web app. Matt, one of the concept authors, actually grew up in Detroit, but now lives in Sweden. He wants to prototype and pilot the concept this summer, and so he's identified the local city of Landskrona in Sweden, which is a post-industrial city desperately in need of revitalization. His long-term vision is to take what he learns there and move back to Detroit and bring the idea back with him. Each concept is moving forwards in its own way, but I'm really proud to announce for the first time on stage today that a wonderful organization called Venture for America, who aims to transform graduating students into successful entrepreneurs, creating jobs, but also transforming the struggling cities that they focus on, will be taking 5 of the winning concepts and giving 1 to each of its team of fellows to take back to those cities and over the next 2 years compete to create the greatest amount of social impact that they can. So what does this all mean? My hope is that this trend of collaboration and cooperation will continue, and that the tools for smart competition will improve. My experiment with Pac-Man shows us that when we only change the interface, people still want to compete. But platforms like OpenIDEO show us that when we change the context and create the right conditions, we can combine that desire to compete with smart collaboration tools and get some really inspiring results. Large communities of people working together to improve the social and environmental challenges that we struggle with as a planet. Their stories show us that we do have it in us to be altruistic, to empathize with one another, and to succeed together. I believe we've got a really timely moment to do something that James Lovelock once prophesied in a book called Gaia. He believed that one day we create a global brain that would harmonize this planet's natural and human layer to help address the issues that we struggle with on both a social and environmental level. I'm optimistic that with these digital communities improving local issues, collaboratively, we can do that. Thank you.